The stench hit them first. Rotting food scraps baking in the July heat, mingled with sweat-soaked wool and chamber pot contents that had been sitting since dawn. But the young girl kneeling on the stone floor couldn't even pause to wipe the perspiration streaming into her eyes as she scrubbed the greasy cauldron with sand and ash. Her hands were already bleeding from yesterday's work. The summer sun hadn't yet reached its peak, but the kitchen was an inferno, and she'd been working for 6 hours already. This was just another summer morning in a medieval castle, and she was one of the lucky ones.
I must get back
You think
to
you
my
know what
duties.
medieval life was like? The tournaments, the feasts, the romance? That's the fairy tale.
Look closely.
The real
This
medieval
is the
world
price.
ran on the broken backs of an invisible army whose names
You
history
sicken
never
me.
bothered to record.
Get out of my sight
These
before I
weren't
forget
adventurers
myself.
or heroes. They were people who fought a different kind of
We are
battle
nearly out
every
of
single
flour,
day,
Master Steward.
one that
The
made war
kitchens
look
cannot
merciful
wait.
by comparison.
Please, just one sack.
And in summer, when nobles escaped to their hunting lodges and country estates, the servants' hell reached temperatures you couldn't imagine. Let me tell you about the hierarchy that governed this shadow world, because power in a castle didn't just flow from the throne. The steward was essentially a medieval CEO, controlling
What is
everything
this
from
filth?
finances
You
to the
dare
fate of
present this
every
horse to
servant
me?
below him.
Get back this
One
stain
whispered
remains,
word from
girl.
him
Are your
could
eyes
end your
painted on?
career, your
I
home,
scrubbed hard.
your life.
I saw him
He
leave
never
her
touched a
chambers just
broom,
before
never
dawn.
carried a bucket. He simply pointed, and others scrambled. Below him operated an intricate web of power. The butler controlled the wine cellars, and in summer, keeping wine from spoiling required constant vigilance in those sweltering underground rooms. The head chef ruled his kitchen kingdom with an iron fist and probably a wooden spoon that doubled as a weapon. In July and August, his domain became absolutely unbearable. Imagine standing over roaring fires
not
when
look
it's
away
already
from me.
85 degrees outside, the heat radiating off stone walls, smoke filling your lungs as you roast meat for hours. The marshal commanded the stables, and summer meant different challenges.
What are you
Horses
doing?
needed constant
Taking what's
watering,
mine.
flies swarmed endlessly, and the smell
Now
of
kiss
manure
me.
baking in the heat could knock you unconscious. His grooms worked in conditions that would violate every modern labor law imaginable. And at the very bottom, the ones who touched what nobles couldn't even look at, they weren't even granted the dignity of job titles. Picture this. It's 3:30 inches the morning, mid-July. The castle stones are finally cool after yesterday's scorching heat, but that relief will vanish in 3 hours. The fire boys are already awake, stumbling in darkness because even in summer, wealthy nobles wanted their morning fires. Why? Status, comfort, because they could. These boys, some as young as 8 years old, had to navigate narrow, treacherous stairways in pitch
More ale
darkness,
over here.
carrying
Turn
loads
that
of
spit
wood and
faster,
coal
the
that
Lord is
weighed nearly
hungry.
as much as they did. One slip, one moment of exhaustion, and you're tumbling down stone steps with an armload of firewood. By 4 a.m., the kitchen erupted into organized chaos. Summer meant fresh produce from the gardens, which sounds lovely until you realize someone had to pick, wash, and prepare
Careful
bushels
now,
of vegetables
or the bread won't
before
be the only
sunrise.
thing rising.
The massive stone ovens,
Perhaps that is
already
my intent,
radiating
Master
intense
Cook.
heat, had to be fired up for bread that would be baked throughout the day. The head cook screamed orders while sweat poured from everyone's faces. There was no ventilation, no fans, no relief. Just stone walls trapping every degree of heat, smoke filling your lungs, and the constant threat of burns from the dozen fires burning simultaneously. Historians estimate that in summer, kitchen workers lost up to 10% of their body weight in water through sweat during a single shift. There was no concept of hydration breaks. While nobles lounged in whatever shade they could find during summer afternoons, servants faced their most brutal hours. The laundresses had it particularly savage. Yes, working in river water sounds refreshing, but they weren't swimming. They were standing knee-deep in slow-moving, increasingly warm water, pounding fabric against rocks for 6-hour stretches under the blazing sun. The lye they used to clean the linens didn't just corrode their hands. In summer heat, the chemical reactions intensified, creating burns that wouldn't heal because tomorrow they'd be back in the water, doing it all again. Inside the castle, maids fought a losing battle against what medieval people called
Away from the
summer
fire,
corruption.
girl. Back to your
Without
duties.
refrigeration, food spoiled within hours. The fragrant herbs they scattered on floors weren't just decorative, they were desperate attempts to mask the smell of rot, waste, and unwashed bodies in close quarters. In July and August, the those herbs had to be changed twice daily instead of weekly. Someone had to gather them. Someone had to lay them down. Someone had to rake up the festering previous layer. The stench was so overwhelming that servants developed chronic respiratory problems from breathing it all day. But the cruelest irony, while they labored in these conditions, they could see the nobles they served enjoying summer, garden strolls, music in the courtyards, cool wine in the shade. Now, let's talk about what kept these people alive barely. You've seen the medieval feast scenes in movies, right? Tables groaning with roasted peacock, honey-glazed ham, elaborate pies, rivers of wine. All true. What they don't show you is the servant standing 3 feet away who hasn't eaten in 14 hours, who can smell everything, who prepared everything, and who knows that if they're caught even licking their fingers, they'll be beaten or dismissed.
I swear,
Summer
Dunstan,
feasts
the
were
cooks are getting
particularly
bolder
elaborate
with the
because
spice.
fresh game and produce
As are
were
the serving
abundant.
girls, if you
Lords
look
wanted
close
to
enough.
display their wealth through excess.
This brew is weak, but you are
7-course
not.
meals, entire roasted
careful
deer,
what you say.
towers of
Drink
fruit.
ale.
Meanwhile, their servants ate pottage.
I am the master
Pottage.
now. You will do
Let that
as
word
I
sink
command.
in because it was the soundtrack of a servant's entire life. Imagine oatmeal, but worse. Barley or peas boiled in water, maybe with some wilted cabbage thrown in if you were lucky. No salt, too expensive, no meat reserved for nobles, no flavor whatsoever. This gray, lumpy slop was eaten for
starve us
breakfast,
while they
lunch,
feast.
and dinner, day after day, year after
It is
year.
delicious.
Their bread wasn't the fluffy white loaves
I
their
am
masters
sorry.
enjoyed. It
My
was
stomach
dense,
aches
dark,
so.
coarse rye mixed with
Do not
bran,
apologize.
often partially stale.
We will find
In
sustenance.
summer heat, this bread developed mold faster, but waste wasn't tolerated. You ate it anyway. The meat servants occasionally received was called umbel's offal and entrails, hearts, lungs, intestines, organ meat that nobles considered beneath them. These weren't prepared as gourmet delicacies. They were boiled into the pottage or made into crude pies. Where did these people sleep after 18-hour workdays in summer heat? Certainly not anywhere comfortable. Most servants slept in communal barracks crammed into the castle's worst spaces attics, where summer heat cooled to suffocating levels, or basements where dampness bred disease. Picture this. 40 people sharing one long room, sleeping on straw-stuffed sacks on wooden planks, with a single tiny window and no air circulation. In July and August, this became a form of torture. The human body generates heat. 40 bodies in an enclosed space generated an oven. The straw mattresses changed maybe once per year, became breeding grounds for fleas, lice, and bed bugs that feasted on exhausted servants through the night. There was zero privacy. Absolutely none. Men, women, teenagers, all together. You couldn't have a private conversation, a private thought, a private moment. Everything was communal because individuals didn't matter, only the collective function mattered. Senior servants got marginally better treatment. A steward or head housekeeper might have a tiny private room, perhaps 6 feet by 8 feet, with an actual door. This was considered an enormous privilege, something you worked 20 years to achieve. Personal servants like valets and chambermaids often slept on roll-out beds stored under their master's beds during the day. This meant if your master woke at 2 a.m. wanting something, you were immediately
tonight,
available.
perhaps tomorrow.
Sleep wasn't a
Meet me
right.
by the east
It was a
gate when the
brief
watch changes.
pause between
If we are
periods of
caught, they will
service.
hang us both.
Here's the secret that made the
Do not
entire
fight
system
me!
function. Invisibility. Not actual invisibility,
I am not yours to
obviously,
take.
but something almost more impressive. The ability to be physically present yet completely unnoticed. This was the most valuable skill a servant could possess, more important than cooking ability, cleaning speed, or physical strength. You had to master the art of existing without existing. Silent footsteps on stone floors, eyes perpetually downcast, speaking only when directly addressed, and then in barely audible whispers. Moving through rooms like smoke, appearing exactly when needed, and vanishing the instant your task was complete. Making eye contact with your master was forbidden, a violation so severe it could mean immediate dismissal. Why? Because eye contact implies equality, suggests personhood, hints at the possibility that you might have thoughts or opinions, the system couldn't tolerate that. You weren't a person. You were a function. Summer made this invisibility even more challenging because sweat betrayed you. Nobles didn't sweat. Officially, they perspired delicately. Servants, laboring in the heat, were drenched. But you couldn't wipe
Leave
your
the
face
linens.
in front of nobility.
Come warm my bed instead.
You couldn't show discomfort. You definitely couldn't complain about the heat while fanning your mistress. The psychological
drink.
damage from this forced
And come warm
invisibility
my
was
bed.
profound. You witnessed everything, affairs, arguments, criminal conspiracies, family secrets, but you had to pretend you saw nothing, heard nothing, knew nothing. You were a living ghost, and ghosts don't have memories. Let's examine the actual tasks that filled these endless summer days, because servant work sounds vague until you understand the specifics. Chamber pots. In a castle with 50 to 100 residents, someone had to empty 50 to 100 chamber pots every morning. In summer heat, the contents fermented overnight, creating a smell so vile that this job was punishment for the youngest or most disobedient servants. You carried these pots down multiple flights of stairs, trying not to spill, trying not to breathe, trying not to vomit, and dumped them into cesspit that bubbled and steamed in the July sun. Water collection was endless. No running water meant every drop for cooking, cleaning, bathing, and drinking had to be carried by hand from the well. In summer, water needs tripled. Nobles bathed more frequently.
Listen closely.
Gardens needed watering.
Master leaves for
the kitchen
Winchester at
required
first
constant
light.
water for
We must be
cooking
gone
and cleaning.
before he returns.
Servants
And if he
made
catches
dozens
us-
of trips daily, carrying heavy
go of
buckets
me, my
on
lord.
wooden yokes that dug into their shoulders, climbing stone steps that offered no shade
You
from the
belong here
blazing
with
sun.
me tonight.
Chimney sweeping didn't stop in summer.
Look what we have
Yes, fewer
pretty
fires
little
burned,
Dane
but
hiding in the
maintenance happened
shadows.
year-round.
Perhaps she'd
Someone
like to
had to
join us by
climb
the
into those
fire.
narrow, dark, suffocating
That was a
spaces
fine
and scrape out
jest.
soot while breathing
We shall
choking
drink
dust.
until
Keep your eyes
The clothing
on the floor where they
situation
belong,
perfectly
you
illustrated the
worthless
gulf
wretch.
between masters
If
and
you ever
servants.
cross me again,
Nobles
it
wore
will be the
layers of
last
silk,
thing you do.
velvet, and fine linen with different outfits for morning, afternoon, and evening. Summer meant lighter fabrics,
I require
but still
assistance.
elaborate and expensive.
Come
Their
closer.
servants,
I told
one
you
outfit,
never to speak of
one,
that again. Do
a
you
coarse
understand
wool
me?
or hemp tunic,
think your threats
maybe a
frighten
second if you were fortunate, worn day after day until it literally fell apart.
I will not tolerate
In summer
loose tongues
heat,
in this hall.
wool became
Get out of my
torture
sight
against the
before I have you
skin,
whipped!
but there were no alternatives. The fabric was
Another round.
deliberately rough,
I say we
dyed
drink
in the
until
cheapest
dawn.
browns and
Hey,
grays,
find me a
designed to
wench
last
before the
through
hour
years
is
of
out.
labor and countless washings. Most lower servants went barefoot even in summer, despite hot stone floors and outdoor paths that could burn feet. Shoes were expensive, reserved for those who absolutely needed them. The irony was exquisite. Servants who prepared their mistress's wardrobe of 40 dresses, who
A good
brushed
day's
and
work done.
maintained fabrics
To us,
worth
then.
more than the servant's
Well-earned
entire
rest.
lifetime earnings,